John Martignoni is the Director of the Office of Evangelization and Stewardship for the Diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, and founder and president of the Queen of Heaven Catholic Radio at 1480 AM in Birmingham. He is also the founder and president of the Bible Christian Society, an apologetics and evangelization apostolate that reaches tens of thousands in more than 50 countries around the world with the truths of the Catholic faith. Additionally, John hosts EWTN's Open Line on the radio, a nationally telecast call-in radio program of Bible apologetics every Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. From 2000 to 2009, John also founded and led the Catholic Businessmen and Professionals Association, which he held quarterly luncheons in the Birmingham area with nationally known speakers for up to 320 men at a time to help the Catholic men in their faith of that Birmingham area. Sounds like something we should do in all of our areas. John holds a Bachelor of Science in Corporate Finance and a Master of Business Administration, both from the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa. He also did 1 year of PhD work in finance at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill from 1988 to 1989. John has been married for 17 years to Janelle and is the father of 3 sons, Brennan, Ethan, and Noah, and 1 daughter, McKenna. Please help me welcome John Martignoni.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Your Excellency. Gentlemen, appreciate all of you being here. As Brian said, I'm not from around these parts, but it's good to see all y'all here today. And since it is right after lunch, I want to do something, maybe get the juices flowing a little bit before I get into my talk itself. You know, as Brian mentioned, I'm a graduate of the University of Alabama, and being here in Michigan at a men's conference, I thought, well, maybe mention a little bit about football. So got a question, is this more Spartan territory or Wolverine territory, or is it a mix up here? Wolverine, I hear a few Spartans, so maybe a little bit of both, but I tell you what, be that I'm from the University of Alabama, I want to first apologize to the Spartan fans for what we did to you guys a couple years ago in the bowl game. And then I want to apologize to you Wolverine fans for what we're going to do to you in the fall. And now that I've worked myself into your good graces, I want to do a commercial like the bishop was talking about, a commercial. These talks that I'm giving are just 2 of 21 different talks that we have through the Bible Christian Society. We have them on CD. We have them on MP3 downloads. They're all available at this website. It's BibleChristiansociety.com. I want you to write that down or memorize it. It's very easy. Bible Christian. We're all Bible Christians here. We're the original Bible Christians as Catholics. So BibleChristiansociety.com. Everything we do is free. So we've got 21 talks that answer a lot of the questions that we as Catholics get. And as you know, as Brian mentioned, what the Bible Christian Society is all about is apologetics and evangelization. And as the director of the Office of the New Evangelization for the Diocese of Birmingham, I just want to let you know that as Bishop was talking about, this year of the faith that's coming up, you're going to start hearing a lot more about evangelization, about the new evangelization, about apologetics. The documents coming out from Rome these days, a lot about apologetics. Well, that's what these CDs are all about, apologetics, explaining the faith to people. Some of the titles are Mary and the Bible, the sacraments in the Bible, apostolic authority and the Pope, the ones you're going to hear today, the communion of saints, the rapture in the Bible, salvation, is it by faith alone or do works have something to do with it? The Bible, is it the Bible alone or does the sacred tradition play a role in our faith as Christians? So go to the website, visit it, They're all free. If you order the CDs, it's $1 shipping and handling charge, I think, for each CD. But if you even write me a letter and say, I can't pay the shipping and handling, we'll send it to you. We send thousands of CDs off to places like India, the Philippines, Africa. So if you can go, if you like what you get, and if you like what you hear today, I would just ask you to consider, if you're a person who donates to church and charity, consider making the Bible Christian Society one of the charities that you donate to. And if you get some CDs or something, you don't like them, and like I said, they're free. If you don't like them, you can send them back and I'll refund your money. Okay. This first talk I'm doing is my conversion story, which chronicles my faith journey over the last 54 years. And immediately I know what you're thinking. Gosh, he doesn't look a day over 37. Anyway, my faith journey, growing up as a Catholic, leaving the church, coming back to the church, and finally growing up as a Catholic. And I want to start off this talk by giving you a word. Now, I'm not saying it in the sense that it might be used if we were at a gathering of folks who are involved with the charismatic renewal. I'm using it rather in the sense that it was used in the movie The Graduate. You may have seen the movie. It came out, I think, in the late 60s. It had Dustin Hoffman as the star. I think that may have been his first big film. And the thing I remember about the movie is that Dustin Hoffman plays this recent college graduate. And his parents are throwing a really ritzy graduation party for him. And a friend of his father's comes up to Dustin at some point, puts his arm around Dustin's shoulders and says, I want to give you a word, just one word. And Dustin's like, what? Plastics. That was it. In other words, he was telling Dustin, or Dustin's character, that if he gets involved with plastics, he can make it. He can make an impact in the world, he can make money for himself, and so on. Well, today I want to give you a word, just one word. Apologetics. If you get into apologetics, if you learn and then teach apologetics, you can have an impact in this world. In fact, if you get into apologetics, if you make apologetics a part of what you teach, of who you are, you can have an impact in the world to come as well. Apologetics, again, if you're not familiar with the word, it's simply about learning how to explain and defend the faith. Now, this talk is about my faith journey, my conversion story, if you will, but it is in many ways a testament to the power of apologetics. All the way through this talk, you will see the role played by apologetics, or the lack of apologetics, in my life. Now, I don't know how into apologetics each of you are. Obviously, some of you more than others. But what I want to do is share my experience with you and hopefully show you what a valuable tool apologetics is and what it can be in evangelization. And I'm not just talking about apologetics as a valuable tool in the evangelization of non-Catholics. I'm talking about apologetics first and foremost as a valuable tool in the evangelization of Catholics. Apologetics as a valuable tool in the evangelization of, the education of, the formation of Catholics. We'll be talking, as the bishop was talking about, the new evangelization. My faith journey is similar in many ways to that of many other Catholics. I was born into a Catholic family, Polish on my mother's side, Italian on my father's side. I was baptized when I was a month or two old. In the second grade, I had my first confession, first communion. I was confirmed in the fourth grade at age 10. After my confirmation, though, I learned little, if anything, about my faith. It was right after Vatican II in the late 60s. As the bishop was talking about, there was some malaise that started to enter into the church, into the, particularly the formation and education that went on in the faith in the church, at least here in this country. I went to Catholic school in first grade and then public school after that, so I had to attend the weekly CCD classes, or now they would call the Parish School of Religion or Faith Formation classes at the church. And after I was confirmed, the only thing I can remember about the CCD classes was that each and every year I would beg my mother not to make me go again this year. She finally caved in and stopped making me go when I was, I think, in the 9th grade. When I was in the 10th grade, I had a next door neighbor that I hung out with quite a bit who was a Catholic, although his family was one of those C&E families, Christmas and Easter. They would go to church. And this guy had gotten very involved with a group called Young Life at the high school. And it was basically an evangelical high school youth group that met at the public high school. And again, he'd gotten very involved with this group. And I remember him asking me, we were out playing basketball on his driveway. He had a hoop out there, playing basketball, and I remember him asking me once whether or not I knew that if I died at that very moment, if I knew with absolute assurance that I was going to heaven. And my response to him was that, hey, I'm not God, so no, I do not have absolute assurance that I am going to heaven if I died at that moment. God makes that decision, not me. He then told me, he said to me, that meant I wasn't a Christian because I did not have absolute assurance of my salvation. He then proceeded to tell me straight out that he was better than me because he was a Christian and I wasn't. All I can remember thinking was, if he's a Christian, and if that's what a Christian is, then I don't want to be one. So here I was at age 16, an age of uncertainty, an idealistic age, an age where you start thinking about the larger questions in life, like, who am I? Why am I here? What is life about? Here I was, completely unarmed and completely unprepared to mount even the simplest defense of my Catholic faith. Yet my Catholic faith, such as it was being challenged. I needed apologetics. If either of us, my friend who ended up leaving the Catholic faith and who is now Baptist, if either of us had had just fundamental training in apologetics, either from the pulpit or in the religion classes or from somewhere, would I ever have left the faith for 13 years before coming back, and would he now be Baptist? It's a question to ponder. What are we teaching our kids in the CCD classes, in the parish schools of religion? Do we need, is the question we need to ask, to be teaching them apologetics, beginning maybe even in junior high, or maybe even earlier. I graduated high school in 1976, went off to college again at the University of Alabama, and for all intents and purposes left the faith when I stepped onto the campus. I did not come back to the church for 13 years until I was about to leave another college campus, which I'll get into in a moment. I received a bachelor's degree in corporate finance, went straight through to get my MBA, and then went to work as a cost analyst for a defense contractor in Huntsville, Alabama. After starting work full-time, I bought my dream car, a 1979 Corvette, L88 engine, glass T-tops, customized stereo system, front and rear spoilers, the whole works. It was a beautiful car. I bought a nice house. I was investing in the stock market. I was playing the futures markets. I had dates every weekend and quite often during the week. There were even 2 young ladies during this time who wanted to marry me. And again, I know what you're thinking. Only 2? In other words, on the outside, I was very successful. By the world's standards, I was very, very successful. But the problem is there was this hole inside of me. a dark, empty hole. And no matter how much money I made, no matter how many things I bought, no matter how many stocks I invested in, no matter how many parties I went to, no matter how many dates I had, this black hole inside of me just kept growing. I felt empty. I felt alone. There were many nights during this period in my life, my mid to late 20s, where I literally cried myself to sleep. I was in such pain, deep pain. And I would ask God to just take my life when I would put my head on the pillow. Just take my life. I don't want to wake up in the morning. And I meant it. I did not want to live anymore. And those prayers were actually some of the most fervent prayers I've ever prayed in my life, even up to this day. And you know what? It's a funny thing about God. He answered my prayers. He did take me. He did take my life, just not the way that I meant for him to. You see, somewhere in that 5 or 6 year period of my life where on the outside everything seemed great, but on the inside everything was a mess, everything was dark, somewhere during that time I received a couple of different things in the mail, unsolicited. 2 small pieces of mail that eventually led to major changes in my life. One was a fundraising letter from a place called Covenant House. You may have heard of it. It's a ministry to runaway kids, kids living on the streets. That letter really touched me, and I started donating money to Covenant House on a regular basis. And you know, it was a funny thing. As soon as I sent off a check to Covenant House, in the mail I got back a whole bunch of requests for donations from other organizations. It's funny how that works. Anyway, I started supporting a few other ministries other than Covenant House, but they all had one thing in common. They were all ministries to the poor. So God was taking my life, but in the sense that I was developing a deep affinity for the plight of the poor and a deep desire to do something about their plight, which led to a new way of thinking about my desire for material possessions. And if you want to understand what a mighty work God was working in my life at that time, one outgrowth of all of this, one outgrowth of my new way of thinking about material goods and material possessions, was that I traded in my dream car, my Corvette, for a Chevy Sprint. 8 cylinders to 3 with the signature. For those of you who know about cars, that will give you some idea of how God was working in my life. The other thing that I received in the mail during this time was a little pamphlet from a guy named Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. Dr. Norman Vincent Peale was a minister in some Protestant denomination, I don't know which one, but he had written this pamphlet that came to me in the mail, which was called The Power of Positive Thinking. I was really taken with that pamphlet. So much so that I went and bought other pamphlets by Dr. Peale, and I bought the book entitled The Power of Positive Thinking. And somewhere in that book, or in one of the subsequent pamphlets that I had acquired, it suggested reading 1 chapter of the New Testament every single day. And when you finish with the New Testament, go back and start over reading 1 chapter at a time. So I did. And I basically went through the New Testament twice that way, reading 1 chapter a day. So God, again, was taking my life. He was answering my prayers. He had established a beachhead in my soul, although I didn't realize it at the time. All of these things that were going on in my life led me to realize that something needed to change. I wasn't happy. I had this emptiness inside of me, but I wasn't yet to the point of realizing that something inside of me needed to change. I thought that I would be happy if I could just change my external circumstances. So I quit my job and I went back to school. I enrolled in the PhD program at the University of North Carolina. I was going to be get a PhD in finance and be a university professor, you know, a really cush job. That would make me happy. That would fill the void. But a funny thing happened when I got to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The first day, the very first day that I stepped foot on that campus, I was assigned an office because I was there on a fellowship, so I was teaching undergraduate classes as well as taking my own classes. All the first year PhD students, I think there were 12 or 13 of us in the business school, were assigned the same office. It was this big open room we called the bullpen. Just a bunch of old 1940s desks, these huge old oak desks, very heavy, and all these 10-foot high old oak bookshelves. For my office, I picked out this one desk, just at random, that was backed up against one of the bookshelves. Well, on this particular bookshelf that my desk was backed up against, there were dozens and dozens of books that had been left behind by former PhD students. Books on economics, on finance, some on statistics, and so forth. I started looking through them to see if there was if any of these books would be useful to me in my classes, which were starting in about a week. So I went through shelf by shelf, picking out a book here, put a book there. The bottom two shelves of this bookcase, however, were blocked by the desk. So, and again, this desk, it probably weighed a couple 100 pounds. It was heavy. So I put my shoulder to it and moved it out, you know, maybe a foot, foot and a half, just enough so I could see if there were any books on the bottom two shelves. Well, there was one book. These shelves looked like they hadn't been seen in years and years. They were covered with a thick layer of dust. And there was one book on the bottom shelf, almost right in the middle, covered with a layer of dust. I picked up the book, scraped the dust off, and my life changed. You see, again, all the other books on these shelves were big, thick, hardback textbooks, finance, economics, statistics. This book was a relatively thin paperback book entitled The Normal Christian Life. It was written by a Chinese preacher. His name was Watchman Nee. I believe he may have been a Methodist. And it was as if this book had been planted there years and years ago for me to find. It just lain hidden there for many years. The whole book was on the letter of St. Paul to the Romans. The whole book. I'd never seen a book like that. I didn't know books like that existed. Imagine a whole book on just one book of the Bible? Amazing. Anyway, I read that book in just a day, maybe two, and I wondered if there might be more books like that one. So I went down to the campus bookstore, which was a very well-stocked bookstore, and I went in not knowing, you know, what I'm looking for. I just went into the Christianity section, and this book caught my eye, and it was called Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis, you might have heard of him. It's essentially a book of Christian apologetics. That book did it. I was hooked. I was on my way back to the church. After reading Mere Christianity, I was, again, just enthralled with this writer, C.S. Lewis, so I went back and got several more of his books and read those over the coming days and weeks. I finally said, well, I've had enough of C.S. Lewis, so I went back to the bookstore, again, not looking for anything in particular, came across this book called The Confessions. Some guy named St. Augustine, might have heard of him. That book blew me away, just blew me away. After that, I read another book that blew me away, The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. Then I got into Fulton Sheen, St. Francis de Sales, and on and on. I ended up reading more books on Christianity that year than I did on finance and economics, which is one reason why I left the PhD program after the first year. I decided the PhD program wasn't what I was looking for, but I still wasn't sure what I was looking for. So I took a position as a finance instructor at a small regional school in Alabama, the University of North Alabama. But 1 week before I left Chapel Hill to take the position at North Alabama, the culmination of all that reading I had been doing was that I finally came back into the church after being out for 13 years. And I went to confession for the first time in probably 15, 16, or 17 years. No one evangelized me back into the church. No one witnessed to me. But it was apologetics that brought me back. Apologetics in conjunction with prayer. My dad's prayers for me. I found out later that my dad, God rest his soul, had been going to Eucharistic adoration at his parish during this time that I was away from the church. He did an hour of adoration one morning a week at 4 a.m. for several years. One of his prayer intentions was that his kids, all 6 of whom had left the church, would come back to the church. So my father essentially prayed me back into the church. I believe his prayers set in motion what I call a chain of grace that put me in touch with Watchman Nee, that put me in touch with C.S. Lewis, that put me in touch with St. Augustine and all the others, which led me back into the church. So for those of you who have family who have left the church, do not neglect the power of prayer, particularly the power of prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. Anyway, I moved back to Alabama and started my teaching job at the University of North Alabama. My class schedule was such that I was able to make it to daily Mass, something I'd never done before. And being single at the time, I was able to get very involved in the church. So here I was, this good Catholic, very involved in his church, a daily communicant. Yet something was wrong. What was wrong was that I didn't believe all the things that the church was teaching. What's wrong with contraception? What's wrong with sex outside of marriage, as long as you're in love, I thought? What's wrong with women priests? Who cares if non-Catholics receive communion? Who is this old guy in Rome trying to tell me how to live my life? What does he know about me? I needed instruction in my faith, but I was so ignorant of my faith that I didn't even know I was ignorant. That's how ignorant I was. I thought I was being a good Catholic, a very good Catholic. I taught for 1 year at the university and realized that a teaching career was not what I was looking for. So I spent the better part of the next year volunteering for Covenant House. That fundraising letter I spoke of earlier led not just to me supporting Covenant House financially, but with me looking at Covenant House as a possible career. There was at the time a lay community associated with Covenant House, which I became a part of. You lived in community and worked at Covenant House. We received room and board and $12 a week. I wanted to work for Covenant House for several years and then possibly hook up with Catholic relief services and go serve the poorest of the poor all over the world. So I signed up with Covenant House and got sent to work in their center in Anchorage, Alaska. They had 12 centers you could work at, and they asked us during the orientation, which, list your 1 through 12, which one? Anchorage, Alaska was my 12th choice. Anyway, I spent 8 months in Anchorage working with Covenant House, and then in the middle of December, when the sun came up at 11 in the morning and skirted across the horizon of the sky for 3 or 4 hours and then went down at 3 in the afternoon, and it was minus 20 degrees that morning when I was walking into work, and it was a minus 90 wind chill, I realized that a boy from Alabama had no business being in Alaska in the middle of December. So I decided to head for a warmer climate and took off for Guatemala. Covenant House had a center in Guatemala City. My intent was to spend a few months learning Spanish at one of those intensive language schools and then go to work for Covenant House in Guatemala City. I lasted 2 months in Guatemala before I got some very unfriendly bacteria inside of me. I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks and had to come home to the States for medical treatment. That temporarily ended my career of working directly for and with the poor. However, I did realize something very important from my experiences in Alaska and Guatemala, and that was that maybe I needed to stay a little closer to home. After getting treatment in Huntsville, I ended up about a month later moving to Birmingham to take a job as an investment analyst with a bank in Birmingham. That was the spring of 1991. And at the bank and at the parish that I had joined, I kept getting put into situations where people were asking me about the Catholic faith. Sometimes I could answer the questions, but many times I could not. So one day I went down to the Catholic bookstore. I had discovered it on the northeastern side of the city. And I went in and I asked him, I just went to the woman working there, I said, listen, do you have a book, a tape, anything that explains the Catholic faith, that tells me why we do what we do as Catholics? And remember, this was a few years before the Catechism had come out. So I asked her, why do we, something that explains why do we believe what we believe? Well, it turned out the woman working there that day was just a volunteer, and she was only there maybe once a week for a few hours, so she didn't really know what was on the shelves or anything, but she just kind of meandered up and down the bookshelves looking for a book. And she came back empty-handed. She said, well, I didn't really find any books, and there was a tape rack, cassette tape rack right there where I was standing. She said, but here, take this tape. I haven't listened to it, but a couple of people I know said it was really good. And I took the tape and I was disappointed. I wasn't a tape person. I was a researcher. Give me a book that I can dive into and pull some facts out of. That's me. So I reluctantly took this tape and I went out, got in my car, put the tape into the tape player, and my life changed again. Little did I know, this tape that she had handed me was Dr. Scott Hahn's conversion story, which if you've never heard it, you gotta hear. When I listened to that tape, it was like throwing gasoline on smoldering embers. Here was a man, a former Protestant minister, who was using the Bible for crying out loud, to explain why he came into the Catholic faith. Imagine that. Explaining the Catholic faith using the Bible. What a novel concept. I started learning how to explain and defend my faith. I started buying all the Scott Hahn tapes I could get a hold of and books on apologetics from wherever I could find them. I started learning apologetics. I started learning the Bible. I started buying, again, apologetics tapes, and then CDs when they started coming out, and then the books. I was learning as much about my faith as I could, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. Truth is intoxicating. I started reading the Bible in earnest, with a new outlook on exactly what this book was and what it meant to me as a Catholic. I learned for the first time not just what my church teaches, but why. The why is so important. Through apologetics, I learned about the Bible, about the Mass, about the sacraments, and more and more and more. As I learned how to defend my faith through all of these apologetics resources, I was necessarily learning my faith. You cannot learn to defend your faith, which is what apologetics is all about, without at the very same time learning your faith. I now understood why contraception is intrinsically evil. I now understood why sex outside of marriage is wrong. I now understood why women cannot be priests. I now understood why Protestants cannot receive communion in the Catholic Church. And I now understood why the role of the Holy Father is so very important. I now understood the Pope's relationship to me. And I understood a whole lot of things a whole lot better as well. I learned about my faith truly for the first time in my life. And everything I learned, again, just made me want to learn more. And this knowledge helped me to strive to change my life. Not on the outside this time, but on the inside. To conform my will to what my intellect was bringing to the table. To conform my beliefs to the church's teachings rather than trying to conform the church's teachings to my beliefs. For me, apologetics was the key to truly becoming Catholic. The key to learning about my faith. The key to learning about the Bible. The key to a deeper prayer life. And that's why I wanted to give you that word today, apologetics. Because of the difference that apologetics has made in my life, in my faith life, in my prayer life. And not just in my life, but the difference that I have seen it make in the lives of many other people that I've had the opportunity to speak to around this country. Now, that is not to say that apologetics is the be-all and end-all. It is not. As I just said, apologetics is a key which can open the door to a lot of other things. It is a tool you can use to educate and evangelize Catholic and non-Catholic alike. A tool you can use to educate yourself, your family, your fellow parishioners, your co-workers, and so on. Roll the tape forward a few years to 1995. I left the banking industry in September of 1995 to become the business manager for a Salesian ministry in Birmingham called the Being Apostle of Christ Foundation. It was a ministry aimed at serving the poor, and particularly the charism of Don Bosco, the children of the poor. One morning in November of 1996, when I was still working there, I needed to go down the road to the post office for some stamps. The drive from my workplace to the post office took less than 3 minutes. Normally when I was in the car at that time, I would pop in a Scott Hahn tape. I was still, again, learning all I could about the faith. But in 3 minutes, if you've ever listened to Scott Hahn, in 3 minutes, you can't really do much because you've only had time to hit the rewind button 2 or 3 times in 3 minutes. What did he say? What did he? Okay, I can't do Scott Hahn in 3 minutes. So I said, well, instead of that, I'll just look for one good song on the radio. I had 5 secular stations programmed into my radio. You know, it's the old where you push the button, and every single one of those stations had commercials on them. And I'm here to tell you right now, this is how God works. If there had been a song, a good song on any one of those stations, I wouldn't be standing here right now. But all commercials. So I said, you know, there's that Christian station in town. Christian music's getting better. So I, rolled the dial over to the Christian station. Well, it was in the morning, and I didn't realize that that Christian station only played paid programming in the morning. No music, so I just didn't really pay attention to what they were saying. Besides, I was pulling into the parking lot at the post office anyway. So I pull into the parking lot at the post office. Stop the car, put it in drive, open the door, turning the key in the ignition. Right as I'm turning the key in the ignition, I hear this phrase come from the radio. The whore of Babylon. Click, and I was like, oh no. And I thought to myself, oh no, I hope they're not gonna go where I think they're gonna go with this. So I quickly turned the key back on, and there I am literally, half in, half out. Got 1 foot, whoa, almost fell. 1 foot on the pavement, 1 foot in the car, hand on the ignition, the key turned, and I listened to the rest of what they said. And coming from the radio, this is what I heard. Quote, this end-time political religious system of the Antichrist, the whore of Babylon, sits on 7 hills. I thought to myself, don't go there. It can only mean one thing. Rome, Rome, Rome is the city on 7 hills. This end-time religious system of the Antichrist will be headquartered in Rome. So here's the identification of the whore of Babylon in Revelation 17. It is an end-time religious system predominantly characterized as Roman Catholicism. That's all the time we have for today. Tune in tomorrow when our series continues. They went there. I could not believe what I had just heard coming from my radio, from this Christian radio station. I finished my business at the post office, and as soon as I got back to my office, I called the radio station to complain. The receptionist connected me with the program manager. His name was Wayne. I said, Wayne, I just heard the end of a program aired on your station, and I have to tell you that it was offensive to me as a Catholic. To proclaim the Catholic Church as the end-time religious political system that the Antichrist will use to take over the world is going just a little bit too far. He said, oh well, look, we have a lot of Catholic listeners and we don't want to do anything to offend them. Yeah, right. I asked him how long the program was, since I had heard literally only about the last 45 seconds of it. And he told me it had been a 15-minute program. I asked him, wouldn't it be fair then to have a Catholic come on the air for 15 minutes to present an opposing point of view? He said that he thought that was a good idea. He liked the idea. He actually acted kind of excited about it. And he said he would have to talk to his station manager about that and get back to me. And we hung up. And I kind of patted myself on the back. I said, cool. I have struck a blow for the church today. He's going to talk to the station manager and get back to me. But then something dawned on me. He didn't take my name or number. Maybe he wasn't being serious after all. The next day, I purposely listened to that station at the same time to see what I could hear. Sure enough, it was more of the same. Another 15 minutes of Catholic bashing, basically. This time, I took down the number of the organization. It's some organization called the Christian Jew Foundation out of Texas. Took their number down, and I ordered the tape series that they were airing on the radio. Got it in a few days later and listened to the whole thing. It was basically 2.5 hours of bashing the Catholic Church. And all of it, every single minute of it, was aired by this Christian radio station. Needless to say, I was a bit put out by all this, so I resolved to do something about it. I decided to write the station a letter. As I was signing my name on the letter, I realized, I said, you know, they probably don't care who John Martignoni is. So I decided to do something that I thought might get their attention. So I made up this organization called the Bible Christian Society, and I made myself the president. I then wrote the program manager as John Martignoni, president of the Bible Christian Society. The letter was a relatively calm one in which I simply complained about the anti-Catholic bigotry, the shoddy scripture scholarship, and shoddy historical scholarship of the program in question. I asked them if they would allow neo-Nazis to air anti-Jewish programming, or if they would allow the Ku Klux Klan to air anti-African American programming. If not, I asked, then why do you allow anti-Catholics to air their particular form of bigotry? I offered to work with them to develop some sort of appropriate response to counter the anti-Catholic bigotry aired by their station. I received no response. A few weeks later, having still received no response from the station, and now with 25 to 30 people who wanted to be members of my non-existent organization, I wrote the station another letter. In it, I said that since the station had not replied to my first letter, then I must assume that they agree with the contents of the program that they had aired, and therefore we at the Bible Christian Society would have to take unilateral action to counter this anti-Catholic bigotry. This action could include notifying the Federal Communications Commission, from which they get their license. It could also include boycotting the station and its sponsors. And I let them know that I was drawing up a list of sponsors. I had written down 2. I told them it could even include picketing the station. And that, of course, if we picketed the station, we would have to notify local television, news, and print media. And actually, in all honesty, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to picket the station because I wanted to get my picture in the newspaper so I could buy a copy and send it to my mom and say, look, Mom, your son made it to the newspapers. Well, I put that letter in the mail on a Monday morning, and Tuesday afternoon I received a call from the station. It was Wayne, the program manager. At first he tried to mollify me by claiming that the station could not be held responsible for the content of every one of its programs. Well, I didn't really think that was a very good reason, since they controlled the airwaves at their station. So I told him, I said, Wayne, I said, look, I said, you need to allow a Catholic to come on and respond to that. And he agreed, and he offered half an hour. I said, well, the Christian Jew Foundation had 2.5 hours. So I wanted 2.5 hours. And we settled on 1 hour. They had an afternoon live talk show. It was a call-in talk show for 2.5 hours. So they gave us 1 hour, gave me 1 hour on it. I immediately sent for the cavalry. Jeff Cavins, who was on EWTN at the time and lived in Birmingham, I called him and said, Jeff, I've never done anything like this before, would you come on with me? And he was very gracious and did so. And what happened was we created quite a stir on Protestant evangelical radio. I focused on explaining that Catholic doctrines such as confession and purgatory do indeed have a basis in Scripture, while Jeff focused on bigger issues such as tradition and sola scriptura. After the program, the station received a number of calls about the show and gave all of the callers my home phone number. So I started getting calls from all these folks, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, but 100% of whom were thanking us for doing the show and asking if we could do more. The non-Catholics said we learned something about the Catholic faith. The Catholics were saying, thank you, these folks are always bashing our faith. Thank you for coming on to defend it. Well, I told everyone, I said, no, we can't do more. I said, it's not my radio station. And I was hoping that the fact that we had done this, that was basically the end of it, and the station wouldn't do anything else like that. Until the very next day when they played a program called Mary, Mary, Quite Contrary. Well, within a couple days, I received a call from a wealthy gentleman in Birmingham who said that he would pay for the airtime if I would get a Catholic-oriented show on that Protestant radio station. Seemed like a great idea at first, but I quickly realized that I knew nothing about putting on a show on the radio. And I was still just really learning my faith, so I wasn't all that comfortable with being on the air, talking about my faith. So I told him, no, crazy idea. In fact, and he said, well, just pray about it. So I went to pray about it that night, and it just seemed crazier and crazier the more I thought about it. So I told God, I said, God, this is such a crazy idea that I'm not even going to pray about it. I said, God, if you want this to happen, you're going to have to kick me in the rear end and make it happen. Lesson in life. Don't ever tell God he's going to have to kick you in the rear end to get you to do something. He just might do it. Through a series of coincidences over the next several months, I found myself sitting in the office of the sales manager for that Protestant evangelical radio station, signing a 1-year contract to do a 1-hour live weekly call-in talk show on Catholic apologetics on the largest evangelical radio station in the state of Alabama on Sunday night. That was January of 1998. I went on the air with the Bible Christian Society, Bible Christian Hour in February. So here I was doing a live call-in Catholic apologetics program on evangelical radio every Sunday night for an hour. First phone call I ever got, the man screamed at me that I was an abomination. What did they do? What were they thinking allowing a Catholic on a Christian radio station? I was called a heretic. I was screamed at, yelled at. But the interest that it stirred in the Catholic community led to Catholic radio coming to Birmingham approximately 7 months after I had finished the show in February of '99. I became the station manager for this Catholic station and did that for a little over 3 years. But because of the Bible Christian Hour, I started getting requests to give talks on apologetics. The Knights of Columbus called, the Sarah Club called. My parish asked me to do a series of talks during the summer of '99. That series was recorded and picked up by EWTN Radio. EWTN began airing it in January of 2000, and all of a sudden I was getting calls for copies of my talks from all over the country. And then calls to, come to Florida, to California, to Michigan, to give talks at parishes. I shipped out about 2,000 copies of talks in 2000. It was about 3,000 the next year, jumped to about 9,000 the year after. And since then, up to date, I kind of lost count, but I think it's close to around 1 million copies of talks that have been distributed. All 50 states, around 50 plus foreign countries. It has been unbelievable. And I know it's nothing that I did because I never wanted to be a Catholic apologist. I tell people I got dragged into this kicking and screaming. Well, between the apologetics work and the station manager's job, I was essentially working 2 jobs. As of April 2002, my 3rd child, Ethan, was born. So I had a 5-year-old son, Brennan, a 2-year-old daughter, McKenna, and a newborn son. I started praying to God to let me know if I should stay at the radio or go out full-time with the Bible Christian Society. What started as a tongue-in-cheek imaginary organization had grown into something very real that was keeping me very busy. And it soon became obvious to me that I was supposed to be out on my own. So as of January 1st, 2003, I started full-time as the president and chief apologist of the Bible Christian Society. And I got to call myself the chief apologist because I was the only apologist. From there, the radio station that was in town was owned by folks out of Jacksonville, Florida. They ended up having to sell off. So a couple years later, we formed a local corporation, brought Queen of Heaven Radio back. Then I got into EWTN Radio, and then hired by the Office of Evangelization, and so on. So I guess I need to end this talk here, but I just want to say in closing that while not everyone is intended to be a full-time apologist, every one of you sitting out there right now, all of you can do apologetics at some level. All of you, through apologetics, can make an impact on the faith journey of others, as well as your own. I want you to think about this. As the bishop was saying about the seriousness of this, you have the power to literally save a soul, or to save souls. But you have to first live your faith, you have to learn your faith, and you have to be willing to share your faith. Again, apologetics is not a be-all and end-all. It's a tool, a valuable weapon that all of us as Catholics need to have. You know, when I first came back into the church, I had this notion that holiness, well, that's for bishops, for priests, for nuns. You know, I live in the real world. I don't have time for holiness. But I realize that all of us, regardless of our stage in life, are called to holiness. Well, after getting involved in apologetics, I've gotten the idea from some people that they seem to think that apologetics is only for former Protestant ministers. You know, people who really know the Bible. No. If any of you feel that way, I hope this talk will in some way help to disabuse you of that notion. You see, God calls all of us, to be ready to defend our faith. 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you. Always be prepared, God says, and apologetics is one way that we can use to be prepared. I want you to have the confidence that you can do this stuff. That's why I want you to go to my website and get my materials. They're easy, they're basic. Each day I hear from more and more average folks just like you and me, from businessmen and women. I hear from students, I hear from junior high kids and high school kids, from housewives, from grandmothers and grandfathers, all of whom are learning a little bit of apologetics, and all of these folks are going out and evangelizing non-Catholics, fallen away Catholics, fellow Catholics, and they are bringing people back into the church. I'll close with this. I always tell people, if I can do this stuff, you can do this stuff. You ever heard of the story of Balaam in the Old Testament? He was a prophet who set out one day to curse the Israelites as they were moving towards the Promised Land. But God sent an angel to stop him. Balaam couldn't see the angel, but his donkey could. The donkey he was riding on. Only because of his donkey was Balaam saved. In fact, the way that Balaam saved was that his donkey actually spoke to Balaam. Spoke to him. That'd freak me out. A talking donkey, for crying out loud. Well, I tell people, I know with 100% certainty that that story is absolutely true. I know it because you are looking at living proof that God can make donkeys talk. You know, back in the 80s, there was this movie, Grease. John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John, and at the end they had the song, Grease is the word, is the word, is the word. Grease isn't the word. Plastics isn't the word. Apologetics is the word. If I can do it, you can do it. Thank you.